Alors, bonjour à toutes et à tous. C'est vraiment avec grand plaisir et beaucoup d'intérêt que je participe à ce forum sur le thème de l'immigration post-pandémie, les changements de paradigme dans les tendances migratoires et les effets du télétravail. Évidemment, je ne me substituerai pas aux experts qui suivront, mais je suis honoré de vous adresser quelques mots en guise d'introduction. Évidemment, on le sait tous, on traverse une période unique en son genre où nous sommes appelés à combattre un virus et maintenant ses variants. Cette pandémie a pratiquement mis la planète sur pause et nous a incités à faire différemment dans nos organisations, tout en nous adaptant à cette nouvelle réalité. Je souhaite justement d'entrée de jeu aborder l'enjeu de l'adaptation via la réponse ministérielle à cette crise. Ensuite, afin de mettre la table pour nos conférenciers, je conclurai sur le thème même de la conférence, l'immigration post-pandémie. Donc, faisons un saut dans le temps. Mars 2020, la pandémie frappe. Nous étions alors loin de nous douter des bouleversements qui allaient affecter des pans entiers de nos vies. Au ministère, nous avons d'abord été à l'écoute de nos différentes clientèles, soit les candidats à l'immigration, les personnes immigrantes, les entreprises, les collectivités, afin d'identifier leurs besoins et d'établir nos priorités. Je vous donne un exemple d'entrée de jeu. Nous devions privilégier la mise en œuvre de solutions permettant aux immigrants temporaires présents au Québec de maintenir leur statut et de poursuivre leur démarche d'immigration. Nous avons donc assuré la prolongation des certificats d'acceptation du Québec. À ce moment, beaucoup de nos processus étaient encore papier au ministère. Nous avons donc accéléré le processus de présentation des demandes en introduisant la transmission électronique des documents et le paiement en ligne dans plusieurs programmes à fort volume, comme le PEC, le programme Expérience québécoise, et les étudiants étrangers. En assurant la continuité de nos services en télétravail, on a réussi à maintenir un rythme élevé dans les décisions de sélection, puis je peux vous dire qu'aujourd'hui, ça nous a permis de résorber les délais provoqués en début de crise sanitaire. Le ministère a également travaillé de concert avec le gouvernement fédéral pour permettre de différents assouplissements au processus d'immigration, notamment tout récemment encore comme exemple, permettant aux travailleurs étrangers temporaires qui sont présents au Québec d'obtenir un permis de travail ouvert, ce qui leur permet de choisir leur emploi et leur employeur en attente de l'obtention de leur résidence permanente. En parallèle, on a agi en francisation et en intégration. En francisation, nous avons effectué un virage majeur en très peu de temps. Les cours de français en présentiel se sont tous donnés à distance très rapidement. Puis malgré la pandémie, nous avons maintenu une participation stable à plus de 31 000 personnes immigrantes pour l'année 2020-2021. On a également créé des groupes multirégions et multisites pour répondre rapidement à la demande des élèves de toutes les régions. La personne immigrante a eu accès à des cours qui répondent plus précisément à ses besoins sans égard au lieu où elle se trouve. Le personnel enseignant dispose maintenant d'une plateforme de référence, d'échange et de diffusion du matériel pédagogique, ce qui n'était pas le cas avant. En collaboration avec nos partenaires communautaires, nous avons aussi assuré, voire bonifié, les services d'intégration à distance tout en poursuivant le déploiement régional. On compte maintenant 9 directions régionales. Objectif Intégration, c'est un programme visant à offrir à nos clientèles un panorama complet de la diversité québécoise et de favoriser la compréhension du monde du travail. Ainsi qu'Accompagnement Québec, c'est notre service d'accompagnement personnalisé des personnes immigrantes, répondre aux besoins de chaque personne, se font désormais en ligne, ce qui n'était pas le cas avant, ou en présence là où les règles le permettent via nos agents d'aide à l'intégration. Dans le cadre du programme d'appui aux collectivités, qui a été lancé en pleine pandémie, qui vise à favoriser l'intégration et la pleine participation en français des personnes immigrantes à la vie collective, nous avons conclu 68 ententes avec des villes et des municipalités régionales de comté, pour un total de près de 20 millions de dollars. Le contexte a aussi amené le ministère à adapter son offre de services aux entreprises. On mise beaucoup sur cette offre puisque la vision gouvernementale est d'arrimer l'immigration aux besoins du marché du travail. On a notamment mis en ligne l'interface consacrée aux entreprises, le portail employeur, qui permet d'accélérer l'identification et la prise de contact entre les entreprises québécoises et les travailleuses et travailleurs étrangers selon les professions visées. Parce que vous le savez, bien que la crise sanitaire ne soit pas encore résorbée, le phénomène de rareté de main-d'œuvre se manifeste de plus en plus dans plusieurs secteurs et dans plusieurs régions du Québec. Rapidement, nous avons réalisé des développements informatiques importants dans la plateforme web des Journées Québec, facilitant les missions de recrutement international à distance. Entre septembre 2020 et mars 2021, nous avons réalisé 10 missions de recrutement avec l'appui de nos partenaires, puis certains sur de nouveaux territoires comme le Brésil, Maurice et le Sénégal. Les Journées Québec en mode virtuel se poursuivent en 2021, notamment en France, Belgique, Tunisie, Maroc et Mexique. Donc, pour conclure cette partie, on a effectué des virages importants et rapidement afin d'assurer à nos clientèles des services électroniques et virtuels et surtout que l'on veut plus efficient. Mais cette souplesse et cette agilité organisationnelle devront se poursuivre et guider nos actions dans le futur, même une fois sortis de cette pandémie. Je vous parle d'adaptation, je vous parle d'agilité, tout cela aura un effet sur l'immigration, notamment sur l'immigration économique. Depuis plus d'1 an et demi de pandémie, nous devons constater qu'un certain nombre d'emplois peuvent être réalisés efficacement à distance grâce aux technologies actuelles. Mais j'observe que la question de la relance économique se pose plus que jamais en tenant compte des préoccupations des individus, notamment la conciliation travail-famille et la qualité de vie. Une chose est certaine, je pense qu'on s'entend tous là-dessus, le télétravail répond à tout le moins en partie à ces préoccupations. Mais la question qui se pose, c'est si dans ce contexte, quel sera l'impact du télétravail dans la décision de certains travailleurs spécialisés qui projetteraient d'émigrer au Québec? Cela influencera-t-il les flux migratoires dans les prochains mois ou prochaines années? Nous pourrons poser la question à nos panélistes. On peut toutefois émettre l'hypothèse que les technologies et le télétravail ne pourront pas remplacer le rêve d'une vie meilleure, qui est évidemment l'une des principales motivations de l'immigration. Pour une société d'immigration comme la nôtre, où l'immigration contribue à répondre aux enjeux économiques, mais aussi sociodémographiques, les tendances de fond d'immigration soulèvent des questions quant à nos stratégies de promotion et d'attraction face à la concurrence internationale. La perspective d'un emploi à la hauteur de ses compétences et la reconnaissance des compétences occuperont une place importante dans cette stratégie visant à attirer les meilleurs talents. Mais nous devrons poursuivre le travail d'identification et d'amélioration des autres éléments, des autres paramètres qui pourraient constituer des facteurs concurrentiels positifs pour nos communautés et pour le Québec. Je nous invite maintenant à réfléchir ensemble sur ce sujet avec nos conférenciers. Je vous remercie et vous souhaite des échanges éclairants et fructueux. Je vous souhaite un bon forum à tous.
Alors, bonjour et bienvenue à cette conférence plénière sur le thème, comme on l'a dit, immigration post-pandémique, changement de paradigme dans les tendances migratoires et effets du télétravail. Donc, je ne vous cacherai pas que ce seront les thèmes qui seront très précisément abordés au cours de ce forum. Je m'appelle Lisa-Marie Gervais, je suis journaliste au Devoir, je couvre les enjeux d'immigration et de diversité et ça me fera plaisir d'être votre modératrice ce midi, aujourd'hui. Alors, évidemment, comme le titre le dit, les intervenants, les panélistes vont nous aider à réfléchir sur les tendances migratoires et surtout les conséquences et l'impact de la pandémie sur l'immigration, autrement dit, comment la pandémie a changé la donne sur le plan de l'immigration. Alors, sans plus tarder, je vais vous présenter nos quatre intervenants, quatre panélistes qui vont s'exprimer aujourd'hui. Je les présente brièvement et je les laisse ensuite, je les présente les quatre et je les laisserai ensuite parler un petit peu d'eux-mêmes et de leur expérience. Alors, nous avons Andrew Seeley, président de l'Institut des politiques migratoires. Nous avons Michelle Klein-Solomon, directrice régionale pour l'Amérique du Nord et des Caraïbes à l'Organisation internationale des migrations. Nous avons Daniel Bélanger, qui est professeur au département de géographie et titulaire de la chaire de recherche du Canada sur les dynamiques migratoires mondiales. Alors, c'est à l'Université Laval. Michelle Layton, chef du service des migrations de main-d'œuvre à l'Organisation internationale du travail, qui remplace à pied levé, on la remercie. Elle remplace Manuela Tomé, qui devait être présente de l'Organisation internationale du travail et qui a eu un empêchement. Alors, peut-être à vous, Monsieur Seeley, de commencer brièvement. Parlez-nous de vos travaux, votre fonction.
Thank you for the invitation to be part of this very esteemed conference. I am at the Migration Policy Institute. We are a nonpartisan, independent research organization based in Washington, D.C. and Brussels that looks at mobility patterns worldwide, at human mobility, and at migration policies. And I'm going to talk about three things that I think have come to the fore as a result of COVID. There are three different things, but as you'll see, they're all intertwined in their own way as well. One is how do we get back to some sort? How do we restart mobility? We are at a moment where we are probably less connected than we've been since World War II. We have done more to sort of close down traditional mobility patterns. That's not a criticism. That was necessary at the time when we were dealing with a pandemic, and we weren't sure, what role that interconnections across international boundaries played in this. So it made lots of sense to close down borders. But this has largely been done in a very haphazard way so far. I mean, every country was making decisions on the fly with the best information they had. There's a lot of inertia built into these decisions. This, in some countries more than others, I would say my country in the United States is one of those that, there's enormous amount of inertia built into some of the decisions about whether to open or not again certain kinds of borders. There isn't always a clear logic from, one decision to another, why you can fly to Mexico, but not to the UK, or, these are things that sort of got locked in at different moments, why you can fly to Mexico, but not cross the border, or fly from Mexico to the US, but not cross the border. I mean, these are things that are, were locked in for different reasons. They all had rationales behind them. But there is a need to do some deep thinking about this. And we've actually been working with the International Organization for Migration. I'll use it for Michelle in a moment, trying to do a little bit of work in, how do we begin to curate some of these decisions, have conversations across borders, get people talking to each other. There's obviously no central clearinghouse to do this either. These are sovereign decisions, but they're sovereign decisions that ultimately require cooperation and conversations across borders. And the conversations range now from reciprocal arrangements, countries agreeing to open up if others do, to talking about, bubbles, travel bubbles, to thinking about things like vaccination passports, which have been hard to get traction on, have been very easy to do in some countries, like the Nordic countries, but much harder in places like the United States, right? But I have a feeling that the longer the pandemic goes on, we may see a movement towards some sort of vaccination passport, perhaps not centrally controlled, at least in the case of the United States, but perhaps where people have apps where they can upload their own information if they choose to travel. So we're nowhere on that right now in the US, but I could see this becoming more of a norm globally. And there's a huge question around this too, is what do we learn from this about borders and mobility? What do we learn for next time? What do we learn for the next pandemic? What do we learn for the next terrorist attack that, unfortunately there will be things, we hope not, but there will be things that cause us to close borders. So how can we learn to coordinate better the next time around on this? And I think that's a question that matters in real time. It matters certainly for the tourism industry. It matters for business, but it also matters for families staying connected. It matters for, all sorts of reasons which cause people to move back and forth across borders, and which we've interrupted in somewhat haphazard ways during the past couple of years. And again, I'm not criticizing that we closed it down. There were really good reasons to close down travel in the same way that we ask people not to go to restaurants and bars. That said, how do we begin to make order out of this and make sure when we're using, controls on mobility, we do it in a way that is strategic and well thought out, right? The second set of questions, I would just throw out is workforce. I mean, I think there's a huge set of questions around workforce. What's going to happen next as we open up and economies reheat, Canada and the United States among them? What are the needs in the economies? Who do we see? And where does immigration fit into this? Immigration has been almost absent in our conversations on the future of the workforce. We know workforces are being restructured everywhere after COVID. And I think there's a huge conversation that we should be having around that. And finally, we should be thinking about regional migration. I know Michelle will talk more about that, but how do we take what has been enormous pressures for regular migration and begin thinking how we create legal channels, work-based channels, employment-based channels, family reunification, protection-based, that can replace some of those irregular movements. So those are some of the things we're thinking about at Migration Policy Institute.
Nous allons en parler avec plus de détails. Merci, M. Cellier. Et j'invite nos prochains panélistes à se présenter brièvement, mais effectivement à me faire part de leurs observations sur finalement l'impact de la pandémie sur l'immigration et en lien avec vos champs de compétences respectifs, que ce soit l'économie sociale, géographique, etc. Je vous cède la parole, Michelle Klein-Solomon, à vous.
Bonjour tout le monde, c'est vraiment un plaisir d'être parmi vous. Merci, monsieur le ministère, merci à tous les participants. Je vais changer en anglais, j'espère que ça, c'est pas un problème. I'm Michelle Klein-Solomon, as Lisa Marie introduced, the Regional Director for Central and North America and the Caribbean of the International Organization for Migration, the principal UN agency dedicated to migration globally. And of course, we work with many counterparts that have particular roles in migration, like my friend Michelle Layton from ILO. I'm going to focus on a few things Andrew highlighted, but go into a little bit more depth on some. And to say that, of course, the pandemic has had a profound impact on health, social, and economic situation of countries around the world. And it has directly or indirectly affected millions, of course, with migrants being among the most affected. Many have lost their livelihoods, no longer able to meet basic needs, such as accommodation, food, and healthcare. And migrants were stranded, unable to return, or confronted with discrimination and xenophobia. At the same time, the pandemic has showed us that migrants have continued to contribute critically to the well-being of communities and economies in destination countries. Working as doctors, nurses, or caregivers, migrants are vital to many countries' public health responses. They're also an essential part of the workforce in other key sectors of the economy, such as agriculture, food, and other forms of manufacturing and distribution, and cleaning and disinfection service, just to name a few. Moreover, their remittances have been essential lifelines to their families, communities, and indeed countries of origin. So now, more than ever, there's a need to build back better. And safe, regular, and orderly migration, as promoted in the Global Compact for Migration, has to be a critical part of those efforts and is key to unlocking the benefits of migration, both for migrants and for their countries of origin and destination. A little bit deeper on the impact of the pandemic on migration in North America. In Canada, the numbers of new applications and extensions approved for temporary residence decreased by 48% between 2019 and 2020, while authorizations and visas issued for permanent residents decreased by 49%. We've seen similar trends in the U.S. with the total number of immigrant and non-immigrant visas issued in fiscal year 2020 decreasing by 54% compared to 2019 levels. In Canada, with respect to high-skilled workers, 34% of people working in scientific research and development are foreign-born, and immigrants account for nearly 40% of computer programmers, 41% of engineers, and more than 50% of all chemists. Despite the ongoing effects of the pandemic and higher unemployment rates overall, employers in many sectors for which migrants are critical, including professional, scientific, and technical services, are citing profound labor shortages. In part to respond to decreased immigrant arrivals, the Canadian government, as was emphasized by the minister, has introduced several innovative initiatives to provide permanent residency to individuals already living in Canada on temporary status, including international students. And many studies in the U.S., including by Andrew's organization, the Migration Policy Institute, have indicated that despite the negative effects on the growth of industries that traditionally rely on highly skilled workers, have chronic shortages. And there will be a need to increase migrant labor to restart economies. That is clear. The health sector of Canada, 1 of every 4 healthcare workers is an immigrant or foreign-born. That's broken down and even higher, for example, among dentists, 39%, 23% of registered nurses, 37% of pharmacists, and many are essential to nursing and residential care facilities, as well as home health care. The same can be said with respect to agriculture in both Canada and the United States. I won't go into the numbers, but just to underscore the point that migrant workers are essential. And my key point here is that even with the emergence of teleworking, of digitalization, migrant labor will remain essential. It's essential and will not replace the spaces left behind by shortages in national labor forces. So many areas of work cannot be undertaken through telework, from agricultural to care work, from manufacturing to delivery, and so much more. Physical presence of workers is absolutely essential, and many of these sectors are highly dependent on migrant labor. As just one example, in the middle of the pandemic, while countries throughout the region took extraordinary measures to address the need for agricultural labor and approved measures to ensure the steady supply of migrant workers. This was equally the case in the US and Canada as in Costa Rica, for example, for coffee plantations. So it is not just the major North American destination countries that are dependent on migrants, but also some more thoroughly through the region. And the key takeaway from this is that North America and Central America's socioeconomic recovery and long-term growth will depend on immigrants. I haven't mentioned yet fertility rates and demographic trends, but it is absolutely clear that Canada and the US are fundamentally dependent on immigrants to support their longer-term population and workforces and to support increasing numbers of people who are retiring. So developing flexible and innovative mobility schemes for all the things that Andrew and I have just talked about will be essential. And I would like to underscore Andrew's point that it will be absolutely essential that these policies and their implementation be developed in cooperation. It makes no sense to build the capacities for one country's labor market without reference to the needs in other countries. This is a fundamental opportunity for countries, particular destination, to work together, to invest in countries of origin, to help prepare potential migrant workers with the skills and the other social elements that they will need to facilitate mobility. And we also need to look at the impacts of environmental degradation and climate change, and the particular focus of this forum also on the green economy. Much more needs to be done here in bringing all into a sustainable form of migration that benefits both countries of origin and destination and has positive impacts on the sustainability of the economy. So let me stop there, but just say from IOM's perspective, the key challenges will be addressing the negative drivers of migration, because too much of it takes place today through informal and dangerous means. Recognizing, secondly, that there is a need to promote safe, regular, and orderly forms of migration. And finally, and most importantly, that can best be done by working together, bilaterally, regionally, and working with all of the different stakeholders, governments, employers, unions, civil society, recruiters, of course. And that's what we hope to see in the coming time. That will be essential for not only for the economies, but for the well-being of all of our societies. Thank you very much.
Merci, Madame Klein-Solomon. On en comprend effectivement que le télétravail, en fait, n'empêchera pas le besoin très grand que les pays auront pour plus d'immigrants, pour plus d'immigration. J'inviterai maintenant Daniel Bélanger à dire quelques mots. Je vous inviterai à être un peu concis. Le temps file, on voudrait entrer plus en détail dans certaines questions. Alors, Madame Bélanger, à vous la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Gervais, et je vous remercie pour l'invitation à participer à ce forum avec des collègues d'organisations très importantes sur la question migratoire. Donc, je suis détentrice de cette chaire de recherche du Canada sur les dynamiques migratoires mondiales. Je suis professeure depuis 25 ans et je réalise des projets de recherche qui comportent des analyses statistiques et des recherches de terrain en Asie du Sud-Est, en Amérique latine. Et depuis quelques années, j'ai réalisé un projet en Turquie sur les réfugiés syriens avec des chercheurs de l'Université d'Ankara. Sur le Québec et le Canada, je dirige actuellement un projet de recherche en partenariat avec des acteurs de terrain sur les travailleurs résidents temporaires dans 4 secteurs d'emploi: manufacturier, agricole, services et de santé. Donc, pour compléter les analyses macro que mes collègues sont très bien positionnés pour nous livrer aujourd'hui, j'ai choisi de vous parler un peu de ces recherches de terrain avec les travailleurs migrants temporaires au Canada pendant la pandémie que j'ai réalisé avec des collègues et des étudiants. Donc, une nuance que je voudrais apporter quand on parle de travailleurs migrants temporaires, on parle souvent des gens qui appartiennent à certaines catégories administratives qui sont admis en vertu de certains programmes, mais je voudrais mentionner qu'il faut vraiment élargir cette notion parce que on a aussi beaucoup d'étudiants internationaux sur le marché du travail. Le sous-ministre Dagenet les a mentionnés en ouverture. On a aussi les demandeurs d'asile en attente de statut qui sont munis aussi d'un permis de travail. Donc, collectivement, cette force de travail représentait 1,3 million de personnes au Canada en 2020 et travaillait dans beaucoup de secteurs jugés essentiels pendant la pandémie. Donc, je voudrais parler de certains défis qu'ils ont rencontrés. Donc, les délais administratifs pour les renouvellements, changements de statut, les démarches pour l'obtention de la résidence, les reports d'audience pour les demandeurs d'asile. En début de pandémie, ça a été très, très difficile, étant donné la rigidité des catégories migratoires. Donc, le sous-ministre Dagenet a mentionné des adaptations qui ont été mises en place au provincial, au fédéral, dans le cas du Canada, et de même que dans d'autres pays, on pense à des campagnes de régularisation des travailleurs de la santé, travailleurs agricoles au sud de l'Europe, par exemple. Mais quand même, je pense qu'il faut vraiment tirer des leçons de la nécessité de cette agilité bureaucratique, administrative, pour adapter, pour rendre ces catégories qui sont quand même, il y a énormément de catégories, les conditions de séjour, les conditions d'accès au marché du travail, l'accès aux droits sociaux varient beaucoup. Et donc, on a vraiment besoin si on veut optimiser le potentiel de cette main-d'œuvre qui est déjà présente sur le territoire et assurer le respect des droits de ces personnes, il faut absolument faire preuve d'agilité, comme on a commencé à le faire effectivement. Il faut quand même mentionner que beaucoup de ces travailleurs migrants de toutes ces sous-catégories ont fait un effort considérable, ont porté un poids parfois démesuré de la pandémie. On pense aux préposés aux bénéficiaires au Québec qui ont été très exposés au virus. On pense à des groupes comme certains étudiants internationaux qui ne sont pas couverts par les régimes provinciaux d'assurance santé. Bien sûr, les travailleurs agricoles qui ont déjà été mentionnés, avec lesquels on fait beaucoup de travaux de terrain cette année et en 2020. En 2020, la pression à la productivité a été très forte étant donné leur nombre réduit. Malgré l'ouverture des frontières, le flux n'a pas été aussi important que les années antérieures. Donc, plus de blessures professionnelles, plus d'accidents de travail, lesquels sont souvent peu déclarés. Donc, dans le reste du monde, bien sûr, les travailleuses domestiques, un groupe très, très important, qui parfois déjà confinés dans certaines régions du monde, comme on pense aux pays du Golfe, l'ont été encore plus. Des licenciements massifs, des personnes bloquées, comme a mentionné Andrew Seeley, donc des gens pris dans les aéroports, licenciés, impossible de rentrer. Donc beaucoup de drames qui ont été mis à jour et qui, j'espère, vont nous amener vers une conscientisation accrue du rôle fondamental de ces travailleuses et travailleurs pour les pays où ils ont migré.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Bélanger. Je céderai maintenant la parole à Michelle Layton de l'Organisation internationale du travail. Parlez-nous un peu de vos observations de cette équation entre pandémie et immigration.
Thank you very much. And apologies again that Manuela was unable to join us. I lead the ILO's labor migration program globally and really happy to be here with such distinguished panel and with the Deputy Minister. It's certainly timely and extremely relevant, and particularly central to ILO's mandate of ensuring decent work for all, even as the world of work changes. And of course, as we collect data, in addition to the grave human loss, we've seen how the pandemic has had tremendous impacts on jobs and livelihoods, and for some, devastating impacts. Our data show that the equivalent of 255 million jobs were lost in 2020, and that is 4 times more than during the Great Recession of 2009. We know that women have been particularly affected with higher levels of unemployment lost, or higher levels of employment lost due to COVID compared to men's employment. Actually, the estimate is 2021 will show that about 13 million fewer women will be working compared to their levels in 2019. And about 4 billion people have faced losses without adequate access to social protection. I think some of the other speakers were mentioning this problem, which is around the world in so many countries in the middle of this pandemic. We have 169 million migrant workers, and 43 million of them are here in the Americas. And as Michelle said, some are most acutely affected. They're working in the informal economy by and large, in temporary work. These jobs are often unprotected, and they have higher levels of insecurity, higher layoffs, worsening working conditions from the data we have collected, and excluded from access to healthcare benefits. Quite a number, as mentioned, were stranded, couldn't get home, or couldn't work in the countries they were in, and certainly women were also mostly affected in this way, working in domestic work. They particularly struggled. The pandemic has also transformed the way we work, how we do our work. Many of those who were able to keep their jobs work remotely, even across borders, especially if they were in the high-skilled, knowledge-based sectors. And this form of work is likely to persist as the pandemic recedes. So it will be critical to understand the trends related to telework, its relationship to labor migration, and how to ensure that these changes support rather than undermine our goal of decent work, including from migrant workers. But we have to consider that labor migration is also affected by trends in automation of work, in climate change, in population aging. And these can create both opportunities, but also limits for labor migration, depending on the sector, depending on the types of workers, and certainly influence the skills that migrant workers will need. These issues were discussed recently at by ILO's constituents in June at the International Labor Conference, which adopted the global call for a human-centered recovery to COVID-19. And this call really emphasizes the need for inclusive, sustainable, and resilient actions. We know the recovery and the pandemic is proving longer and more difficult than we imagined, especially as new variants emerge and youth workers are affected particularly. Countries deprived of the vaccine will not just suffer health consequences, but opportunities for labor mobility, domestically and across borders. And the call by ILO is really to be transformative, to take transformative action, to step up our commitments and ensure that all workers and migrant workers have access to decent work. And this means to tackle the underlying disparities of treatment faced by migrant workers, which persisted so long before the crisis, but which we now have to really address because they really were exposed openly by the crisis. I'll stop there because I know the other questions are going to take on some of these other issues of this new paradigm. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Layton. J'ai envie de vous amener à parler de manière plus spécifique, peut-être dans un premier temps, sur les flux migratoires. Est-ce qu'on entrevoit un changement de paradigme, un changement profond dans les déplacements, dans les mouvements migratoires, justement? Et dans un deuxième temps, on pourra parler de la question économique et celle du télétravail plus spécifiquement. Faites-moi signe aussi si vous voulez intervenir ou renchérir. Je donnerai la parole à Monsieur Sellé sur ce changement de paradigme potentiel des flux migratoires actuels.
Yeah, I think we're looking very much at a change in paradigms. And one of the things that I think we need to be looking across at least two different dimensions. I mean, One is where in the labor forces in Canada and the United States and in Mexico, by the way. I mean, one of the things we should say is Mexico is increasingly a middle-income country, an upper-middle-income country, though there's a great deal of poverty, but also is beginning to have workforce needs, right? Not still as it's recovered from recession, but it was before COVID and will afterwards. So the three countries of North America, as many other both developed and emerging economies around the world, are going to have needs probably in three areas. And we know high skilled, right? This is the area that has been a enormous amount of focus. We know there's a lot of competition over people in high tech, people who are, doctors and lawyers and engineers. That's going to continue. And the countries that do better on this are going to be better placed to innovate in the future, right? And that includes, a lot of middle income countries, Mexico, but even countries, in the region, Colombia, Chile, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay. There are a lot of countries in the Americas that are looking at those high tech sectors and the professional classes. We also know that in lower skilled areas, agriculture was mentioned before, for example, but also some areas of manufacturing, lots of support occupations, there's going to be needs. And those, I would say the second dimension is also what's permanent versus temporary. Those are jobs, some of which are permanent, some of which can be satisfied with the temporary programs like the Deputy Minister was talking about, where Canada has been a real leader in terms, and Quebec in particular has been a real leader in bringing people on high quality seasonal programs, and particularly for Central America. This is an opportunity also where there are migration pressures for a win-win, right? Where people who are who are otherwise going to go migrate through irregular channels have an opportunity to do something seasonal that keeps them anchored in their communities and allows them to earn a dignified wage. And I think there's a real need to look at that. The ILO has a lot to say about this as well, because I think there's a huge question about how you make sure those programs are respectful of the rights of workers, because they start off at a disadvantage for workers if they're seasonal. They have less leverage and less bargaining power. And so how you design it really matters. And ILO has been very active on that. But in the middle, and this is the one we talked the least about, those middle skill jobs. There are a lot of middle skill jobs that are also going to be vacant, where we also need to be thinking about people and how we create those migration pathways. We've always thought about high skilled and low skilled, right? And we should really say high skilled and probably, lower skilled. They're not necessarily low skilled, because actually a talented agricultural worker is a talented agricultural worker has a skill set, right? But middle skill jobs, which require some level of education, some level of technical training, are incredibly important. And care work was mentioned earlier. So let me just throw that out. That is one that actually, taking care of people, even in the besides doctors and nurses who fall in the high skilled area, other areas of care work require some preparation and training. They don't always require a college degree. They don't always require licensing, but they do require a skill set. And that is an area in particular. It's not the only area, but it is one of those areas that I think we're going to see expand. And we need, and then with this I'll finish. I think we need to be seeing as we're pulling out of COVID, the real challenge is to take advantage of this moment of growth, in which immigrants are going to play a dynamic role, right? They're not the only ones. We should be very concerned about domestic workers as well, but we should also be looking at where immigrants form part of the solution to make sure that we create a virtuous cycle of growth in our economies and a growth that's equitable.
Merci, M. Célie. J'ai envie d'écouter Mme Klein-Salmon. Est-ce qu'on assiste à un changement de paradigme dans les flux migratoires?
Thank you for the question. And I couldn't agree more with what Andrew just said with respect to the skills needs and being open about that. With respect to the possibility of a change of paradigm, regrettably, I think it's absolutely needed, but whether it will happen depends on a lot of factors that are outside the scope of migration consideration. For example, political trends and dynamics that have to do with ensuring, obviously, first and foremost, and governments have to be concerned about this, ensuring adequate employment levels of their nationals. And regrettably, while that is a fundamental need, there is often in many countries, and I'm not simply talking about the US and Canada here, but we see this around the world, including in the Caribbean, including in areas much further afield, there's a politicization of these debates, and without an ability to look at really where there are the gaps in both skilled and lower skilled. And again, I completely subscribe to what Andrew said about this. And that politicization is impeding the ability to have more evidence-based, more rational, and more regular migration policies that will really serve the interests of both destination and origin countries. And I would like to underscore what Andrew said about the possibilities of generating virtuous circles that genuinely benefit countries of origin and destination, and of course, the migrant workers and their families. And that paradigm shift today is being impeded in many countries by rising levels of xenophobia and discrimination that are really out of sync with the fundamental needs of economies, employers, and workforces. And that's the paradigm shift that we need to see happen in order to have more rational migration policies and the feeding of economies in both origin and destination countries. And I think that takes tremendous courage and leadership by political leaders to be willing to step up and say, yes, we need to be concerned about our domestic workforce, first and foremost, but we also need to recognize that our domestic workforce is not fully adequate to address the needs of our economies. And therefore, we need to put in place more and more efficient regular migration opportunities and absolutely ensure that they are transparent, that they respect the rights of migrant workers, that they don't negatively prejudice domestic workers. But all of that is possible. It just requires a fundamental investment and political courage. Thank you.
Beaucoup de volonté. Oui, merci, Madame Klein-Solomon. Madame, le temps file. Madame Bélanger, Madame Layton, quelque chose à ajouter sur le sujet? Madame Bélanger.
Très brièvement, parce que ce qui a été dit par Andrew et Michel est excellent. Je suis tout à fait d'accord. Et je veux juste ajouter que oui, je pense que la pandémie est un moment d'exception, une opportunité pour vraiment que les choses changent. Et je voudrais souligner ici le rôle de la société civile, du grand public. Je pense qu'avec la pandémie, il y a eu vraiment une conscientisation du rôle clé que jouent les travailleurs migrants, les immigrants en général, particulièrement dans certains secteurs d'emploi. Donc, quand on pense au Québec, à la crise sanitaire dans les résidences pour aînés, je pense que beaucoup de gens sont devenus conscients que les personnes qui s'occupent de leurs parents sont des personnes migrantes à statut précaire et ont compris beaucoup mieux quelles étaient leurs conditions de vie, leurs conditions de séjour. On pense aux travailleurs agricoles qui sont sur des permis fermés au Canada et tous les abus auxquels ce type de permis de travail les abus que ça peut occasionner, entraîner. Donc, j'espère que, justement, oui, beaucoup de courage politique, d'abord et avant tout, mais aussi une conscientisation au sein de la population, des organisations de la société civile pour faire pression sur les gouvernements, sur les États, pour que, justement, on saisisse cette opportunité exceptionnelle, ce moment d'exception dans l'histoire des migrations, et qu'on puisse vraiment assurer des voies sécuritaires et des conditions de vie et de travail qui respectent les droits fondamentaux pour tous les migrants et immigrants. Merci.
Merci. Madame Layton, bon, on semble, les intervenants semblent s'entendre sur le rôle clé que jouent les immigrants dans la revitalisation de l'économie. Il s'agit de voir comment le faire. J'ai envie de vous entendre, Madame Layton, sur peut-être, oui, effectivement, sur ça. Est-ce que comment il pourrait des acteurs importants pour revitaliser ces économies? Aussi l'importance peut-être de l'immigration économique. Est-ce que ça va toujours constituer un bon levier pour répondre aux besoins de main-d'œuvre criants dans plusieurs pays? Je sais qu'au Canada et particulièrement au Québec, c'est c'est le cas. Si vous avez quelque chose à ajouter sur le télétravail aussi, qui est notre troisième thème, je sais que le temps file, mais je vous cède la parole.
Yes, no, I can certainly speak to that. I mean, labor migration can certainly boost economic recovery. I think everyone has mentioned the link and contribution to economies, and certainly recovery in various sectors where employment has fallen. Nationals are going to, nationals may or may not take the job, so there will continue to be a dependence, probably a structural dependence, as there has been in the past, on migrant workers for particular sectors like construction, agriculture, certainly in areas of healthcare and so on. The United States, Canada, and other countries really are dependent. So that's not going to go away. But so many and I would say too that there are huge labor deficits that have been shown, but there's also the families in emerging economies and low-income countries that depend on remittances to support the health and education of their families. But we really want to underscore what some of the other speakers have said, and that is that decent work deficits undermine these contributions. Migrant workers still pay up to 17 months of their salary for a job in many countries, and this puts them into debt service, certainly rather than poverty reduction, and creates risks of forced labor and human trafficking. There's still not good systems in place for recognizing migrant skills. And I think this is certainly going to be an ever-growing and increasing problem, which means they're not able to contribute fully to the potential for economic recovery. We're looking at not being able to ensure that economies are taking full advantage, and nor are they paid, of course, what they should be. A recent report that we issued showed that the disparity is somewhere between 10 and in some countries up to 40% of a wage difference doing the same job as a national. And I hope this is a concern to all of us, because we have to close these gaps, and if we're going to support their rights and ensure that their contribution is meaningful. Countries certainly can benefit if migrants are included in society, and certainly if they enjoy fundamental rights like freedom of association, if they have access to social protection, allow migrant workers to access even skills development while they're working in the country of destination, because they can improve their contribution to these economies. There's also opportunities in a number of ways if we want to create decent work and use this opportunity, as so many have said, in the recovery to build back better. And the first is to align labor migration systems with international labor standards, particularly those that are created especially for migrant workers, domestic workers, regulating private employment agencies, even areas in labor inspection. We can also establish better skills recognition systems. Now, that's one way to address the disparities in not recognizing skills, but too few countries have them. And certainly too few industries, even within countries, that have certain sectors where skills are recognized. And social protection is not available or extended to migrant workers, but it should be. We think that these can help implement more sustainable growth, and certainly social dialogue will be critical to ensuring that sustainability. The workers and employers organizations are really critical partners if we're going to build back and recover. I have a few comments on teleworking I can say, but why don't I let the other colleagues come in. Thanks.
En fait, je cherchais à savoir si on peut être délinquant et prendre 10 minutes de plus, ou si on doit s'arrêter là. Je sais pas si les organisateurs peuvent... Mais allons-y. Très brièvement, c'est intéressant, c'est majeur, le télétravail dans cette pandémie. Alors, quel serait l'impact de l'arrivée du télétravail et qui semble s'installer de manière durable?
Well, I can say for certain that telework is really something that has been a major component that we've recognized in this pandemic, and we've seen that across many skills areas. But I'll point out something that was mentioned earlier, and that is that most migrant workers are not working in these high-skilled areas where they're able to telework. Frankly, they're in areas where their physical presence is really required. So while we see, for instance, that across the workforce, maybe data we have coming out of 30 countries shows about 550 million people work from home in 2020, which was 17% of the global labor force, compared to 3% in 2019. We can see that much of that was not done by migrant workers because the majority are in informal work, temporary work, and in those sectors that require their physical presence, like agriculture, construction, healthcare, domestic care. They have to be in the other country to do their job. So this feature will not, we think, abate as the pandemic recedes. In fact, these structural dependencies on migrant workers for these jobs probably means they won't be able to access telework. Another question is how much access do people in low-income countries have to technology, that would allow them to take advantage of the opportunities. We're going to be looking with the World Bank at a report on brain drain and brain gain to really look at how we can take a look at the telework opportunities. But certainly, we know that telework is not equally distributed across economies, and this is even so in North America.
Effectivement. Madame Layton, je vais devoir vous arrêter. On me dit que finalement, on n'a pas l'approbation de continuer. On est trop délinquants. J'ai vu des hochements de tête parmi les participants. Donc, je présume qu'on soutenait, on était d'accord avec ce que vous disiez. Je vous remercie infiniment d'avoir participé. Andrew Seeley, Michelle Klein-Solomon, Michelle Layton, Daniel Bélanger, merci beaucoup. Vous avez semé plein de pistes de réflexion et merci pour vos observations sur cette vaste question de l'immigration en temps de pandémie. Je vous remercie beaucoup.